thank you, Lewis, for joining us, and thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming on a Saturday morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. So, yeah, my name is Lewis, and I'm based in Bonn. And I'll be talking to you today about Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, as the second Buddha. So, I'll show my screen. Okay, so that should be full screen. Is that looking good to you? Great. Okay, so here is an image of Padmasambhava, maybe familiar to many of you. He is considered to have been in the 8th century, born in Udayana, which some people say is in the Swat Valley, up in the kind of Pakistan towards the Silk Road, and was important, especially to Tibetans, for having come to Tibet during the 8th century reign of the Emperor Trisong Detsen, and aided him in the spread of Buddhism there. So this image you can see is quite colorful, from the 19th century. It's a Nyingma image, and the Nyingma were one of the schools who were most devoted to Padmasambhava. But now his image has spread out beyond that, and his popularity crosses many of the schools of Buddhism and even the non-Buddhist Tibetan religion of Pön. And the iconography here, you can see, is multicolored and says something perhaps about the multiple aspects of Padmasambhava. He is holding a vajra, the symbol of Tantric enlightenment, a skull cup, which is connected with antinomian practices, also longevity, which is important for him, and a katvanga, a kind of trident, which is a useful taming instrument. And in Tibet, he's known as a tantric tamer of the indigenous spirits, and he is said to have tamed them so that he could build Samye Monastery in the center in the 8th century and help to spread especially Tantric Buddhism there. So I will be talking at the end about another image of him, which you see here from Bodha in Kathmandu. I've just got back from there. And this is a new park or pond that was refurbished after the earthquake in Kathmandu, and now puts Padmasambhava in a very prominent and public way near to the Bodha stupa that he has historical connections with. But going back in time a bit, we also have early depictions of Padmasambhava. In this talk, I won't talk too much about the imagery, the early imagery, though I'll touch on it. This is a 13th century depiction from the Rubin collection, and it is about the kind of earliest main image of Padmasambhava that we have at present. And here you can see he still has the katvanga, the vajra, and the skull cup, but his details have not been completely fleshed out in the same way as the more modern images. And this is true also in the literary images. There are elements in there, in the literary images, that are continued on into later narratives, but some of them are expanded over time. One of those is this issue of him as the second Buddha, or a second Buddha. So this process of expansion, the Dunhuang sources that I'll talk about, roughly 9th, 10th century, talk about him in mythological terms and helped us to see an early cult of Padmasambhava. So by cult, I don't mean anything pejorative. I just mean a small following, the basis of his later popularity, especially perhaps in the southern Tibetan areas around the Himalayas and into Tibetan cultural areas of the past. Then these narratives are not forgotten, and they are adapted and interpolated into later large histories of the coming of Buddhism to Tibet. And I'll deal with one of those, the testimony of Ba, the Bashe. And then those narratives themselves expand into the formation of the classic kind of narrative of Padmasambhava, beginning with his birth on a lotus, miraculous emanation, and his travels in India and then coming into Tibet in order to tame the deities for the spread of Buddhism. And that's the basis from about the 12th century of the kind of very popular narrative of Padmasambhava. There are others, but those are the what we see when we look at the kind of later depictions of Padmasambhava. Especially in the 14th and 15th century, after the fall of the Mongol and Sakya reign over Tibet, we see a kind of flourishing of new, larger biographies of Padmasambhava, where he is quite firmly described as the second Buddha. And from then on, that is part of his iconography, his depiction in devotional ritual literature up until the present. Okay, so we'll follow that kind of chronological view and then come a bit to the modern times at the end. Okay, so the Dunhuang documents. Dunhuang, as you can see here, is marked with a red circle next to it, which is the place of the Mogao Caves, an important site on the Silk Roads. The Silk Roads run over and under this Tarim Basin to the left, and so above Tibet. During the Tibetan imperial period, which was about the 7th to the 9th century, Tibet ruled over this area in grey. And it may come as a surprise to some of you that there was an imperial Tibetan power, but it was very feared and respected by surrounding kingdoms during this time in the late first millennium. It was at this time that Tibetans at court began to practice Buddhism. And so in about the late 8th century, they took over this Dunhuang area where the red circle is, which was already a center of Buddhism and quite a wealthy center. And they continued the practice of Buddhism there. After the Tibetan Empire fell in the 9th century, Buddhism, and particularly kind of Buddhism in Tibetan language, continued to be practiced in Dunhuang, though it was no longer in Tibetan hands. And so ritual manuals, narratives, and other Buddhist texts written in Tibetan were still found in Dunhuang. We're very lucky to have these texts because they were walled up in a cave, Mogao Cave 17, in about the early 11th century, and then were discovered in the early 20th century. So this kind of time capsule tells us a lot about the Tibetan Empire, tells us a lot about early Tibetan Buddhism and the early cult of Padmasambhava. So down in the south, we have Lhasa, and then on the border of the Tibetan Empire, we have what is now Nepalese areas, marked in blue, Yangle, and then in what is now India, Nalanda, which was a great seat of learning during the first millennium CE. And a narrative about Padmasambhava has him traveling in these areas between southern Tibet and Nalanda Monastery. This is called Paleo-Tibetan 44, and it's available on the International Dunhuang project website, and the link is there. It is a ritual manual, and for those of you who can read Tibetan, you can see in the text itself, down at the bottom, on the penultimate and then the final line, the words Padmasambhava. So that is one of the earliest examples of the name Padmasambhava that we have from the literature. It's a ritual manual about the kilaya, or the kila, which is a kind of tantric peg that you see here on the left of the screen. And it tells the narrative of Padmasambhava being the founder of one of the important kilaya rituals in Tibetan, the purbu or purba, in early Tibetan Buddhism. He is described there as a great magician. He's already a kind of super mundane figure who has magical powers due to the tantric practice of Buddhism, and especially the Kila ritual. One of the examples of this is it's said that as he's traveling, at about the time of twilight, a group of 4 Sei goddesses killed all the people in the area and appropriated their breath. Then Padmasambhava became short of breath, his breath similarly having been snatched away. So he rubbed against them and saying, "What is this?" He captured them and put them in his hat and departed. So he captures these goddesses and then puts them in the hat that you've seen in these images before, which becomes part of the continuous iconography of Padmasambhava. On arriving at Nalendra, i.e. Nalanda, he uncovered the hat, and an exceedingly beautiful woman physically appeared. So he has kind of transformative powers here. She also promised to protect the purbu, the kilaya practice, and he furthermore empowered her as this very protectress. Moreover, the omens being good, he playfully laughed and made an offering of a handful of gold dust, procuring the purbu bunde, the text of the ritual that becomes this important lineage in Tibet. Having returned to Yangle in the Nepalese borderland, he performed everything, including the practices from general Kriya yoga, the kind of basic level of Tantra, up to Ati yoga, the Dzogchen, the highest form of Tantra, according to this text. Okay, so here we see an early depiction of Padmasambhava. He's not here described as the second Buddha, but he is a powerful magician, a siddha, somebody who has gained siddhis or tantric abilities through the practice of Kila, and he is important within a ritual tradition in Tibet. Another narrative does describe him as the second Buddha, but in similar terms, as having the ability of a second Buddha due to the abilities that he has acquired through tantric practice. This is IOL TibJ 644, also available on this IDP site. and it states in part a Mahayoga Vidyadhara, so somebody who is well accomplished in the higher forms of Tantra, the Mahayoga forms, which in some traditions, especially in the Nyingma later on, is one below the Atha Yoga or Dzogchen, is called Vajradhara Buddha. There are 4 kinds of Vidyadhara: a deity Vidyadhara, a medicinal Vidyadhara, a Vidyadhara of maturation, and a Mahamudra Vidyadhara. Now, this is a slightly different form of Mahamudra than the more famous one in Tibet, within the Kagyu tradition, especially a kind of level of Mahayoga practice. Of these, the text says, a deity Vidyadhara gains accomplishment from the deity, a medicinal one gains accomplishment from rasa yana, and so forth. A Vidyadhara of maturation gains accomplishment from one who is the highest of experts, and a Mahamudra Vidyadhara is endowed with the 5 kinds of omniscience, i.e. Acharya, Padmasambhava, and the like. So here, Padmasambhava is being used as an example, a prime example of a Mahamudra Vidyadhara, i.e. somebody who is greatly accomplished in Mahayoga Tantra. So like in Paleo-Tibetan 44, he is a greatly accomplished master, and is here then described, because of that, as a second Buddha. It says the 5 kinds of omniscience, which people like Padmasambhava have, consist of the Vajra eye, the Vajra ear, the Vajra mind, and the Vajra miracles. And the Vajra is again a part of the iconography of Padmasambhava. And he is called a second Buddha. Alike in every way, he should be understood as such, i.e. alike in every way to a Buddha, a historical Buddha, or one of the other Buddhas of the Mahayana. There is no difference between the second Buddha and the first. He is equal. He is called second only because of the different methods he uses to gain accomplishment, i.e. these methods of Mahayoga, which, according to some Tantric texts, the historical Buddha taught only in secret, but here Padmasambhava and other Mahamudra Vidyadharas teach and practice more openly. So this is the beginning of the second Buddha depiction of Padmasambhava. But you can see here that he's considered a prime example of a particular type. Anyone who gains a Vidyadhara status, which is a very high status within Tantric Buddhism, would be considered a second Buddha. So this doesn't mean the second Buddha in a more kind of unique way. But later on, we shall see that this transformation does occur. So the idea of Padmasambhava as a second Buddha and somebody highly adept in Tantra is found in these Dunhuang documents. What's not seen particularly is any of the narratives about him being connected to Samye Monastery, being connected to the Tibetan Emperor, Trisong Detsen. But he is a great tamer of indigenous Tibetan deities and somebody who is seen as to be emulated on the Tantric path. So we move on to the 11th century history, the testimony of Ba, which dates from about the kind of 11th century and was expanded. Now, this is a narrative about Trisong Detsen, the Tibetan emperor, and for the first time here, Padmasambhava is incorporated into the narrative, and he stays in Tibet for a while until Padmasambhava grows skeptical of his power, thinks that it may threaten the empire, and then asks him to leave. So here, Padmasambhava is for the first time connected to Samye Monastery, and also to the tantric power necessary to tame the beings of Tibet for its building. In one narrative, he is recommended to be invited by the abbot of Nalanda Monastery. So again, there's a connection with the Dunhuang documents, who persuades the emperor to invite him by comparing him or his power to that of the first Buddha. So he's not described explicitly as a second Buddha here, but it's said once upon a time when the Bhagavan, the Buddha, was dwelling in the world, there was no one among all the gods and Naga serpents of the Indian subcontinent of Jambudvipa who was not bound by the order of the Buddha. However, in this land of Tibet, gods and Nagas have escaped from control and seem to have prevented the emperor from practicing the holy doctrine. At present, nobody in Jambudvipa possesses greater powers in the use of mantra than the master from Udayana named Padmasambhava. So in this recommendation, we see that the Buddha is described as somebody who lived in India, Jambudvipa, and was all-powerful over the gods and the Nagas. In this later age, this is no longer the case. Perhaps the age has become declined or degraded, and the gods and the Naga have become out of control, especially in Tibet, which is considered in some of these narratives as a kind of borderland, filled with more kind of wild beings in need of taming, compared to the more perfect and paradisical Jambudvipa. So what to do? The gods and Nagas are preventing the emperor from practicing the doctrine, and Shantarakshita, the abbot, claims that not himself, but the master from Padmasambhava is the perfect person to invite in order to tame them, because nobody at present in this declined age has more powers of mantra than this master. So Padmasambhava is invited and helps to tame the deities. But in this narrative, he's not described explicitly as a second Buddha, but as somebody comparable to the Buddha in powers of mantra. Right, so that was the 11th century. And then moving on to the 12th century, we get an increasingly strong depiction of Padmasambhava as important for the taming of Tibet in a narrative by the master of the Nyingma, Nyangro Nyima Oza. There should be a picture here, but for some reason it's not loading. Okay, so Nyangro Nyima Oza was a devotee of Padmasambhava, and he discovered as kind of treasure, Terma, a biography of Padmasambhava from the 8th century, in which Padmasambhava is a more Buddha-like culture hero. He is born miraculously on a lotus, as I mentioned before, in Udayana, but then arranges his own exile, renouncing the kingdom in order to practice higher tantric yoga around the Indian charnel grounds and other sites of power in the Gangetic plain. In this way, he connects to the Dunhuang documents, and after returning to his own homeland to convert his father to Buddhism, he then, like in the Tibetan 44, accomplishes the Vidyadhara level of Mahamudra in the Nepalese area by means of both practices of Vishuddha and Kila. So here, though the Zanglingma is a kind of more expanded narrative that tells the story of Padmasambhava in Tibet especially, and his miraculous birth, and depicts him more like a Buddha, like the Dunhuang narratives, he still goes through stages of tantric practice in order to gain more and more abilities. So he's not necessarily fully accomplished from birth, at least according to the perception of those around him in this narrative. So the Zanglingma chapter 5, which I translated in the book that Jamyang mentioned at the start and edited along with Jeffrey Samuel. He is at the beginning of that chapter thinking, although I have attained the Vidyadhara level of longevity, the reason for which he holds this skull cup in his iconography, if I do not accomplish the Vidyadhara level of Mahamudra, it will have no benefit. And again, this is a Mahamudra, not of the kind of the Kagyu sort, which is kind of comparable to Dzogchen or Ati Yoga, but a form of Mahayoga. So he decides to leave the Indic area that he is in and travel to the cave of Yangle Shi, that is in this narrative depicted as between India and Nepal, where flowers do not wither even in the winter time, which is a place very blessed with auspiciousness. There he took along his consort, the Nepalese Shakya Devi, who bore every sign of perfection as his sadhana partner, his partner in tantric rituals. Then, having disclosed the 9 butter lamp mandala of the glorious Vishuddha, i.e. Heruka deity, as a sadhana form, as a tantric ritual, 3 kinds of obstacles arose to the practice of the sadhana, namely the Naga Yongpo, the Yaksha wild or Yoma Kajetur, and the Logma Sin of the celestial realms created obstacles. So the narrative then goes on in a kind of similar fashion to Paleo-Tibetan 44 to tell how he overcame those obstacles. But it's an expanded narrative from the one that we find at Dunhuang. So here we find the narrative from IOL to J644 of the Vidyadhara of Mahamudra, one who is in that text claimed to be a second Buddha, also depicted as the one who practices in the Yangle Shi area as in Paleo-Tibetan 44. So these Dunhuang narratives are connected together by this text discovered by Nyangran Nima Oza. And though it doesn't describe him explicitly here as the second Buddha, this is perhaps implicitly within the narrative depiction for those in the Nyingma school who are aware of the earlier narratives. After that, the time is right for Padmasambhava to go to Tibet and to spread the Dharma. When he arrives, he meets with Trisong Detsen and shows himself to be superior to the king as now an enlightened figure. He also shows that the 2 of them, together with the abbot Shantarakshita, were predestined to spread Buddhism in Tibet due to a previous life in Makuta or Magadha, building a great stupa there. This is the stupa that later becomes identified with the Bodha or Bodhanath stupa, which we'll come back to at the end. So for this reason, Padmasambhava is now seen as an enlightened character, but one who had previous rebirths, together with the main protagonists of the narrative of building Samye. But this status is one built up over time through yogic exercises. Okay. So over time, from the 12th century, this narrative gets expanded in many different ways. And for reasons of time, I won't go into all of them. But one that I'd like to pick up on is one 14th century narrative, again, a terma, a treasure text revealed by Orgyen Lingpa, that is a much longer version of the biography of Padmasambhava, but based on the one of Nyangrao, so hitting many of the same points. One of the innovations in this text is that it more firmly identifies Padmasambhava as an emanation of Avalokiteshvara and Amitabha in the Lotus family, and that thus as an emanation rather than in any way a kind of more human figure. This is also seen in iconography of the same and later times. Here is a tanka of Vajradhara Buddha, and above Vajradhara, you can see his crown down at the bottom there. We have the idea of the emanational principle of Padmasambhava being the human emanation, the Nirmanakaya of the Buddha, who is seen in the center. And the Sambhogakaya form is Avalokiteshvara. But due to narratives like the Pirmakatan, this shifts over time to then be an iconography in which Padmasambhava, who is here on the right, is the Nirmanakaya form. Avalokiteshvara is the Sambhogakaya form, and the Dharmakaya form, the purest form, is now Amitabha. So the Buddha that Padmasambhava was connected to in the earlier narratives drops out into the more Dharmakaya Buddha form of Amitabha. This is something that narratives like the Pirmakatan are influential in. In the Pirmakatan, after this description of Padmasambhava as an emanation of Avalokiteshvara, he is then described as emanating on a lotus, but from the very beginning, he is described as the second Buddha. Unlike in the Zanglingma, the 12th century, even as a prince, when he is in the palace of Indrabhuti before arranging his exile, he is sitting in one of the palace gardens, and some seers pass by, and they describe him thus: Imaho, shaded by the tree of paradise, rich in gems, serenaded by the chirping of many flights of happy birds, in this garden of all sorts of beautifully blooming flowers, meditating on the Dharma which summarizes the superlatives, is Pema Gyalpo, the Lotus King, another name for Padmasambhava. Sublime, immaculate being, O thou second Buddha, lamp of the world, in thousands of ages with hundreds of languages, how powerless we are to say even a little about your perfections that bring us joy, about how your perfections bring us joy. So here in the 14th century, this depiction of Padmasambhava is undeniably one as a second Buddha, but not a second Buddha due to his accomplishments in self-organized exile around Indic charnel grounds, but inherent to his being as an emanational deity, somebody who is identified as Avalokiteshvara and as Amitabha, the Dharmakaya Buddha, and not only as the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni. And later on, this connects to depictions of other political figures. For example, in the 17th century, when instead of Padmasambhava and Shantarakshita and Trisong Detsen being predestined to be reborn, we see the Dalai Lama and Altan Khan being predestined to spread Buddhism in Tibet in the 17th century during their previous life under Padmasambhava. So Padmasambhava is now a Buddha figure under which these other beings were pre-incarnated. So in this narrative, a Mongolian narrative called the Erdni Tunamu Sudur, the deity Peha, a protector of Samye Monastery, declares in front of Jonang, the Jokang Buddha image in Lhasa, I see the helpful Dalai Lama, who by sight knows all conditions, the virtuous Bodhisattva Altan Khan. When we were there all together striving, took a vow in front of Padmasambhava on the summit of the glorious copper-colored mountain. This is the paradise realm of Padmasambhava. By the power of the blessings of the merits vowed by them together, the incarnation of Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, meritorious Dalai Lama, was born in the West. The blessed Altan Khan was born in the East, in the land of the Mongols, a sign that the religion of the Blessed Ones will spread like the sun. In this narrative, which sets up the connection between the Khan and the Dalai Lama, they are seen as being incarnated or previously in the paradise of Padmasambhava. If the Padmasambhava is seen as a more paradisical deity than any kind of human figure. So this is the kind of expansion of the narrative of Padmasambhava into a quite clear second Buddha figure. Okay, so to wrap up, coming to the modern times, the Bodha Stupa is now increasingly connected with Padmasambhava due to these narratives of, first of all, him being previously incarnated in this region, and his image is increasingly found in monasteries and temples around the Bodha Stupa. Then after the 2015 earthquake, the Bodha Stupa was rebuilt, and near to it, an area that once contained a pond was rebuilt as a peace park, and with Padmasambhava prominently in the center. So this is showing that Padmasambhava has been increasingly connected to the site as a kind of pilgrimage and power center. This was built as a symbol of Nepal-China friendship and funded by the Chinese embassy in Kathmandu, as well as the Gyalway Nyungu International Meditation Center, and the development committee of the Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Civil Aviation, Sri Bodhanath area. So they were responsible for creating this, and it was opened on an auspicious time, the Laba Duchen, which is connected with the Lord Buddha, as a pilgrimage and a peace site. So I'll just show you some images of it here. This is the Padmasambhava statue that is at the center of the park. And here is the plaque, which people bow down to when they enter as a sign of reverence to Padmasambhava. They then go round in a circumambulation of the two ponds, and then circumambulate the Guru Rinpoche statue itself. And here you can see the pond, which has a naga in it, suggesting the taming of the nagas, not only of this site, but also more widely, and these symbols being connected to Padmasambhava. The pond themselves have fish in, and the image of Padmasambhava is kind of interesting. It has this Z ornamentation, which is found in other areas of Kathmandu. It might connect to Tamang cultural representations of Padmasambhava, as does the name of the park itself. But this iconography is not found in Tibetan Buddhism, as far as I can see, in the older traditions at least, nor is it found in other statues that are available to buy around Bodha. So this requires a bit more investigation. So the central deity, Padmasambhava, is surrounded by some of his 8 manifestations in little niches, and you can see those to the right, accompanied by Devanagari and Latin script descriptions of the deities, as well as other deities such as Nagarjuna, Amitabha, Amitayus, and these are also subjects of devotion, and you can see rice and flowers and lights being offered to them by people who come to the site for pilgrimage. So this site needs to be worked on a little bit more, but just to conclude, we have seen that Padmasambhava starts off in narratives on the edges of Tibet, a potent ritualist, and still at the very beginning here, a second Buddha, but one that we all have the potential to be if we gain the Vidyadhara of Mahamudra in this life or a future one. Then slowly Padmasambhava is, becomes more popular within central Tibet, and is found incorporated into histories like the Testimony of Ba, comparable to the historical Buddha, at least in his power of mantra. The further adaptation of Dunhuang-like narratives is found in the Zanglingma in the 12th century, both the idea of him as a Vidyadhara, Mahamudra, and also practicing in Yangle Shi, though in this text he's not explicitly described as the second Buddha. He is, however, in the 14th century literature, and from then on. It expands the cosmology, connecting him more strongly to Amitabha and Avalokiteshvara, and shows that his second Buddha status is one that he has inherently, rather than as a process of Tantric practices. And this second Buddha, Padmasambhava, is now getting more prominent, not only in Tibetan areas, but in pilgrimage sites such as at Bodha in Kathmandu. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention, and I welcome any questions or comments.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you very much for this overview. Very interesting. Also, I like the final part about the ongoing tradition. It's always interesting to see how it will develop, and who knows in the future how the current times will be seen, etc. If anybody has a question, please go ahead. Otherwise, I do have one. You don't see any in the chat, so I'll go ahead and ask you. I'm curious about, I'm not familiar with the Bompo literature, but if he's ever seen and portrayed as in a negative light, sort of what the main criticism of the Bompos would be. Maybe perhaps this isn't the scope of your research, but I'm just wondering if you have any comments about that.
I've looked at it a little bit. I recommend a book by Per Kverne and Dan Martin on the prophecies and narrative of Drempa Nanka, who is an important figure also in the 8th century for Bompo history, comparable in some ways to Padmasambhava. So within the Bompo literature, there's again a kind of a movement. In the early depictions, he is seen, Padmasambhava is present, but more negatively described. But later on, he becomes also in other narratives seen as a more kind of positive figure and incorporated within certain Bompo iconographies. The 12th century or thereabouts Dragpa Lingdra history, which is the subject of the book that I just mentioned, is negatively disposed towards Padmasambhava. It describes him as a kind of an antinomian, dangerous figure, somebody wearing monk's robes, but not really having gained the omniscience of Bompo enlightenment, somebody who is, like in the Buddhist histories, predestined to spread Buddhism through a previous life with Trisong Detsen, but this prayer is due to maleficent influence by Indian deities and masters in order to spread the kind of negative Buddhism in Tibet. So Padmasambhava comes there. He manages to convince Trisong Detsen to spread Buddhism. Drempa Namkar and other Bompos try and put up resistance, but ultimately Buddhism does spread there and Burn goes into decline. So that's a more negative depiction. But later on, there are narratives of Padmasambhava which are seen within the kind of positive Bompo framework. So that's also part of the tradition.
Right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I see in the chat somebody shared a link to Lotsawa House. So everybody's welcome to go view that then. And then there's a question from Sadet. Maybe you could read it out, Louis.
Okay. Hi, Sadet. As far as I recall, Padmasambhava is considered as a twin. Any hints in the Buddhist sources for that? Not that I'm aware of. I do seem to remember that in some narratives, but not the ones that I've really kind of studied. So I can't help you there. Sorry.
Any more questions or any final comments from you, Louis?
No, I mean I'm interested increasingly in this park. I'm working now more towards pilgrimage sites within Nepal, connecting with Tibetan sites, but also connecting with sites in India, sites connected with the life story of the Buddha. So if anybody knows more about this park, Perhaps they were there when it was opened, or have any more details about it, then I would be very happy to hear from them. My email address is on my site at the University of Bonn. So yeah, look forward to hearing from you. And thanks very much for joining me to hear a bit more about Padmasambhava.
And thank you, Louis, and indeed thank you everybody for joining us.